afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I am Lisa McGarry, and I am a resource teacher with Social Emotional Learning and Trauma-Informed Care. And with me today is Jen Driscoll. Jen, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey guys, I'm Jennifer Driscoll. I am a resource teacher with Social Emotional Learning and Trauma-Informed Care, and we are happy to be with you all on Friday afternoon.
All right, and we are going to get started talking to you about building resilience today. I'm going to get us started, and we're going to start off with our contact information. With all of our presentations, we have included this, and let everybody who is watching know if you have any needs, would like any resources, have any questions that you're not comfortable with putting in the chat, please feel free to reach out and email any of the four of us. You see the department is made up of myself and Jen, and then our boss, Dr. Lamisa Marks-Johns, and our other resource teacher, Jay Johnson. They are both in the chat and will be responding to any questions or comments, concerns that you might have as we go through this presentation. And if you don't catch our email information here at the beginning, we'll have it again at the end for your reference. Okay, so as we get started, we want to review the goals that we have for this training. And we're going to start off with talking about a definition of resilience, and then I am going to discuss some protective factors, and then we're going to wrap it up with Jen giving us some strategies and some awesome activities that can be used with students or for yourself as you work on nurturing and building resilience. With all of our trainings, we always include a self-care alert. I mentioned that we are the trauma department, and sometimes some of the topics that we are talking about brings about uncomfortable feelings. So if this is something that brings up some things for you, feel free to take a break. I know that these sessions are recorded, so you can always come back to it at a later time. If you have the need to talk to someone, feel free to put things in the chat or email one of us, phone or text a friend, whatever it is that you might need to do. Or even step away and do something relaxing. If you watched any of our other sessions, you may have seen some breathing exercises that we've shown. That's a good way to relax. The weather is beautiful today, or so it seems out my window. Maybe walking outside and being in the sun might be something that you need to do to take a break and relax yourself. First off, we want to talk, and hopefully in the chat you feel comfortable with letting us know why more than ever, resilience and the building of it is so important for our students as well as for ourselves. We know that we are in the middle of a pandemic, which is a stressful time. I have been emailing with some teachers today, and some have talked about their new normal and how it's tough trying to work as a teacher while also keep up with their children and their schoolwork. So why might it be important to build resilience, not only for our students, but also for ourselves? So if you put that in the chat, and we can discuss some of that as we go. With that, let's talk about what resilience is. Here is a definition for you. This is being able to adapt positively to adversity that comes up in life. So I mentioned the things that we are going through, that we are all stuck in our homes or having to make sure we're not in social gatherings with more than a few people, trying to keep our distance from everyone, not just strangers, to ensure that we are not spreading the coronavirus. I think that even the reopening that is getting ready to happen is something that is causing some feelings of anxiousness for me. What is that going to mean? That, this has become our new normal, and this is what we've been told is working. Well, what is it going to mean on May 11th when things open back up? Are we going to see the streets that have been essentially empty of cars now be packed because people are so tired of being in their homes? Well, resilience is understanding that feelings and thoughts and things like that are going to come up, but we have the strength and the skills, to overcome that, to know that yes, while adversity is going to come, we are going to be able to continue functioning and live life in a somewhat normal way, even though we're dealing with hard times. So here are some other ways to look at resilience is the ability to overcome adversity and to thrive. So it's the ability to understand that hard times sometimes come, but they too shall pass. This is something that you don't have to necessarily be born with. It is something that can be nurtured, and we'll talk about some protective factors and some ways in which it can be nurtured for ourselves and for others. Excuse me. This is possible for anybody. It doesn't have to just be people who came from healthy homes, people who had healthy relationships with caregivers. Any person is able to build resilience with the right experiences and skills and thoughts, behaviors, whatever it might be. It encompasses all of that. But resilience is something that can be nurtured. It can be taught. Letting people have that positive struggle. We talked about that a whole lot when I was in a school, about having issues that came up and allowing students to problem solve, not always coming to the rescue, and allowing them to figure out in that growth mindset where they can get from one problem to a solution, and understanding it doesn't always have to be the same path. That just because somebody has shown one way that might not match our needs and our personalities, we may have to do it different, but it's possible for all of us. Resilience also does not mean that there won't be any difficulty. Difficulty is just part of life. It's what allows us to grow. I heard something in the last couple of days that said that you don't grow without failure. So you have to have those moments where you get things wrong, and then you can learn how to get them right. But sometimes it is through the process of doing it wrong that we figure out the easier ways to go about. It's the things that open our eyes to those bright moments, like what this quote here on the slide says, that changes the perspective that yes, something bad happened with a barn burning down, but it opens up the space now to be able to see the moon. So understanding that sometimes it is those moments or those times where life is not the easiest that changes our focus and says, now I have to live a different way, just like we've had to do with NTI, having to stay home and change that path of education. But I also saw something the other day that talked about how teachers have risen up to this, how educators were given no notice, and they were able to put together a system that is working, that is supporting our students, that is maintaining their education, not letting them fall backwards or fall through the cracks, that all of these things are continuing to move forward. So it's like this slide also says, with building a muscle. So you have to continue to be intentional with the focus and the skills and the activities. And as long as that is intentional, resilience will grow. Having conversations with individuals when students, well, I can't read this, it's too hard. Not reading it for them, but finding the ways to help them sound out the letters, putting clusters together, whatever it might be, to motivate them to get past those thoughts so that their actions become positive and resilience continues to grow. Again, it's about being intentional. It's not about saying, well, you can do it. I know you can, but giving them those skills and teaching them ways to overcome or to get past those roadblocks. We want you to think about this, because oftentimes as educators, we can go down that rabbit hole of thinking about all the adverse effects life has on our students, that they have this going on in their home, this situation that is occurring, and we wish, as those people in the caring profession, that we could remove those roadblocks. But with resilience, it's not about taking away the adversity. It is necessary for some hard times to come about. When we talk about some of our other training topics, we talk about how stress is necessary. That stress is what creates that fight, flight, or freeze response, so that when we're in danger, our bodies move to get us out of it. If my house caught on fire, without that stress response, we may not be quick to take ourselves out so that we are able to survive, to call 911, to get the response that is needed. Same thing in those other professions. Sometimes stress is a positive thing because it causes us to move forward or away from harm. That's what it is for us to focus on with our students. Nurturing and being intentional in those strategies, allowing students to build their own resilient muscles so that when we're not present as educators, when they move on to the next grade from us, that they are able to positively struggle to get to some outcome and know, hey, my muscle got a little bit bigger. You know what? Next time it's not going to be as hard because I was able to overcome this. I mentioned this on Wednesday that I love the quote or the thought that, you've survived all of the hard days up to now. You're going to get through this too. That, hard times come and we pull up our bootstraps or whatever other words you want to use to describe it, and we keep moving forward with this. It's about focusing that and teaching our students skills while also honing our own. The last piece that I want to talk about is protective factors. And I mentioned this when I was talking about how resilience can be nurtured in others. These are the things that we can do. These are the things that, if they are present, will nurture that ability to be resilient in times of adversity. So when we're looking at protective factors, we're talking about events. We're talking about characteristics. We're talking about supports in the family. We're talking about supports in the environment that allow for healthy development and positive life outcomes. Sometimes it is just in the outlook. Sometimes it is understanding, okay, yes, this might be overwhelming. However, I have skills that will allow me to continue to move forward in life. It might be something as small as learning multiplication facts, but getting all of that and even being able to say to those students who are really struggling, well, do you remember how it was really hard for you to remember your times tables by 12? Well, but you got there and you were able to move past it. So now let's look at our ways of writing biographies or narratives, whatever it might be, moving on to another skill. But as we continue to build those things as reminders, we're increasing that resilience. That muscle is growing and those times are getting easier to overcome. Some examples of protective factors, and I have mentioned this first one with showing sensitivity and responsive caregiving. This one I think is critical because it's about meeting people where they are. If I am one who is facing a really hard time, my coworkers know that my needs are different than theirs. And just because mine are different doesn't make them right or wrong, but they are sensitive to what I need. So if it's a really hard time, maybe I'm not the hugger, but maybe that's not what I need. Maybe I need a card, but maybe somebody else is a hugger. And I have to be mindful of that in their time of need. That responsive caregiving is understanding sometimes people don't do well with physical touch. I've been watching the news and saw a conversation about having to wear masks. And there is a lady who's been on the news several times who was a victim to some violence. And she said that putting the mask on is a trigger for her. Well, if she was someone that we interacted with, then we would be sensitive to that. We would be responsive to that, not shaming her and saying, well, you should wear a mask anyways. She is having anxiety attacks and being triggered because of putting that on. That's an example of showing sensitivity and responsive caregiving. Providing the emotional support in the ways that we can to also allow them to build that for themselves. So I know that there are times where I need to reach out to individuals to support me emotionally. And then there are times where I know I don't have to reach out because even though I know that they would be there, that I have built that skill, so I don't always have to rely on it. The other thing that I like to point out, and throughout this job and working with other individuals in schools, I love this support for caregiver well-being. There are many things that we do that focus on students, but also being mindful in times that sometimes the caregivers are doing the best that they can with what they have in the moment. Understanding that this is an overwhelming time for them as well, and trying to be sensitive and responsive to their needs, not just the needs of the students, but building those relationships with caregivers can be so critical to increase the protective factors for our students. It's like a domino effect. We connect with those who care for our students at home, and those caregivers, trust us, and then it builds on that. So now they're going to be supportive of what you're trying to do with students at home, and it's a circle of support. We're going to move into some strategies and some activities, and Jen's going to talk to you about some of those and ways in which we can support resilience specifically.
All right, so we're going to talk about strategies that support resilience. And when we talk about these strategies that support resilience, I don't want you just to think about your students during this time period. I also want you to think about yourself. We have gone through a collective traumatic experience throughout the last couple weeks. And so when we're thinking about how can we support our students to become more resilient, we also need to think about how can I support myself to become more resilient throughout this time period. And so a lot of these strategies that we'll discuss are not just great for the students that we work with every day, they're also really good for ourselves. So let's jump in and look at some of these strategies. So this first graphic is an overarching look at different things that support us in becoming more resilient in everything that we do. So talk to me for a second. Which of these do you guys think would be easy to do right now or harder to do right now? Lisa, what's your opinion?
I think that goal setting with realistic expectations kind of floats in the middle for me.
Okay.
That I've had to change the goals that, are realistic. And there are some that I find creeping in. I'm like, man, I wish I could do that. But I'm not going out in public. So that's not going to happen. So I'm having to sort of shift my mindset, but then also able to look at things within my home and say, oh, that's something that I can achieve. It's just different than what I would have focused on had I not been shut up in the house for as long as we have.
Yeah. One that I've talked about, ability to recognize my own emotions. I've mentioned that one every day that we've trained this week. Another one that I think I will touch on is willingness to overcome difficulties rather than avoid problems. Usually I am like, let's deal with issues wherever they may come. But yesterday I noticed that I was just in a funk the whole entire day. I don't know if it was the weather. I don't know if it was just everything compounding. And so my husband looked at me and he was like, you good? And I'm like, I don't even know. Like, I didn't want to discuss the situation. I didn't want to do any of it. So I've noticed that there are things that would be normally really easy for me to do in building resilience that might be a little bit more difficult based on where we're at right now. So I think this is something that's really interesting for us to keep in touch and be aware of, especially as we work with our students and look at ourselves in this resilience building component. So let's look at some really specific strategies that we can utilize in building resilience. The first one is connection. And I love that connection is a key part of building resilience because connection is what we need in everything that we do. We have to think about new ways to build connection and why connection is so incredibly important. So one of the things we want you to think about is prioritizing relationships. We want you to encourage your students to prioritize relationships. Encourage them to seek out social support networks, to seek out those pro-social peers. Do it for yourself. Seek out people that you know are good for your life, that are going to breathe life into you. Look for ways that you can support and connect with caregivers. Lisa mentioned this earlier and how incredibly important it is. It's so incredibly important for the work that we do. Yes, you're going to be in touch with your students, but also think about how important it is to be in touch with their parents or their caregivers as well, because they're also going through it too. I have a 7th grader and a 4th grader in JCPS, and I received an email from my 7th grader's dance teacher. She goes to a performing arts school, and she just gave me feedback on work that my daughter was doing. And she praised Amelia for a performance that she had recorded in our backyard. That felt great for me, just getting that feedback, but it also felt great that I could turn around and give that to my daughter, who tends to overanalyze everything. So we all need that connection. And I'm someone who connects with teachers on a regular basis. But as a parent, I don't always get that. So that connection piece is vital for all of us. So continue to look for those ways. All right, so the next strategy that we're going to talk about is wellness. And I love wellness for a lot of different reasons, because wellness isn't just that I'm going to take care of my body, but it's also that I'm going to look for ways to take care of my mind. So one of the things that we want you to think about is, how can you look for ways to foster this in the work that you're doing with your students as well as yourself? Think about avoiding negative outlets. Encourage your students to do the same. Ask them to turn off the TV when it becomes toxic. Walk away from those news media outlets when you know that you've watched too much. Stay away from people who have become toxic for you. That one is huge. Strive to be more hopeful. Help your students learn what it means to accept change. This is a huge period of change for each and every one of us. But think about some of your students where this is a really big period of change that we would walk them through, and we're not able to do that with them physically. Your 5th graders, your 8th graders, and your 12th graders. We would normally be walking them through those periods of change, but we can't do that. So think about ways that you can help do that with them throughout this process. We can have conversations. We can do journal writing prompts. We can do one-on-one videos to help them talk about what it feels like to go through this change. Are they excited about the next steps, or are they scared? This is a huge part of building resilience, because while they might be afraid, they might also be a little bit excited. And so that's an amazing thing that we can do. Talk about self-efficacy and the ability to know that you have what it takes to deal with whatever life's going to get through. And this is something you can do with kids from K through 12. And then encourage them to share some new experiences in wellness. How are they learning to care for themselves throughout this process? Because kids may be taking on new challenges that they've never taken on before. They might be learning to cook or learning to care for themselves in new ways. And so while this is out of the ordinary, it still encourages them to think about and care for themselves, which is a beautiful resilience building component. All right, so the next strategy that we're going to talk about is being open and aware. And so I really like this because it encourages us to think about how we're feeling and accept it for what it is. So one of the things that we have to learn how to do as humans is to accept challenging thoughts for what they are, but also provide a safe space for those challenging thoughts to flourish. Because here's the deal, all feelings are okay. They're a part of that human experience. And so what we want to do is we want to encourage ourselves and our students to be okay with what we're feeling throughout that process. Because there are going to be days where we wake up and we're like, man, I'm okay. I'm feeling great. The sun is shining. I'm going to knock out all these things today. And then there are going to be days where we wake up and we don't feel like doing anything. I dealt with this with my 4th grader yesterday. We have set aside time where I can sit down and help him with his schoolwork. And we map out the assignments that have to be done at the beginning of the week so he knows what's expected of him every day when we sit down. Yesterday we sat down and it took us 25 minutes to do one math problem. Math is his favorite subject. I finally looked at him and I'm like, dude, what is going on in your life? And he's like, I don't know. And then he just starts crying. That day was not a day that we were going to get through much. And he finally looked at me and he goes, I don't know what's wrong with me. And so we had to create a safe space where we could be aware of where we were at and be okay with it. That's something that's going to come up throughout this time. So be open and aware and allow yourself to process that. And this next one goes along with it beautifully. And this next strategy is be compassionate. But in that, it's not just be compassionate for those around you, but also encourage your students and yourself to show compassion to yourself. So I want you to think about how beautiful of a resilience building component this would be. When we teach ourselves and our students to be mindful of how you're feeling, physically, mentally, and emotionally, it's a huge process. But it teaches them not to judge themselves too harshly. And it helps students to understand the beauty of giving grace. Learning is a process. There are going to be days that you fail, but failing is a part of the learning process because we can never grow unless we're stretched. And so when we teach our students that it's okay to fall down as long as you get back up, and we walk them through that process and we teach them how to give themselves grace, then they really understand what resilience is all about. So one of the things we want to make sure that we do throughout this is give you some things that you can do with your students. We want you to be able to walk away with some activities that you can allow them to practice this resilience building piece. So if you access our Google Slides or if you email us, we can give you all of these links. But here are some that you can try. You can have your students create a vision board. You can allow them to complete a grit interview, which gets them talking to people about what resilience looks like in action. It gets them asking big questions. You can allow them to share stories of resilient people throughout history, or even some famous people that they might be interested in that they had no clue had to learn how to become resilient. You can teach them what we call the hard thing rule, which is where they have to try something new. They're the ones who are responsible for picking it. They must finish what they start, and it's theirs to own. And this one's really cool because it shows them that everybody has to get outside of their comfort zone a little bit. Here are a few others that you can try. One of my favorites is it inside or outside of my control? And for those of us who have type A personalities, this one's a big one because it gets them thinking about, this is within my realm of control. This is what I can handle and this isn't. If you go to biglifejournals.com, there are a ton of amazing activities that really get kids thinking about resilience. There are journal prompts, there are different things that they can create, and they go all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade. So feel free to check out some of these things, and then let us know what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like more of, and we're more than happy to help you with any of those. So here are a few more strategies that support resilience. I won't go over all of them with you, but just a few. Get kids to build on those feelings of competence and sense of mastery. Every kid is great at something. And so allow them to feel really successful at something and then build on that. Teach them how to reframe their thinking. Instead of feeling like they're defeated, help them to reframe that and think, how can I do this better? Or what can I grow from when I try this? A few more that we'll talk about are things like facing their fear, but with a support system, knowing that you've always got their back. Don't rush to their rescue. Allow them to try things out a little bit, but always meet them where they're at and then help walk them to where they need to go. And also remember that reactions throughout all of this are going to be varied. So empathy and understanding will go a really long way for your students that you're working with, for the people that live inside your home, and for yourself. So just meet them with empathy and understanding. So as we wrap up today, I'm going to leave you guys with a quote, and this can kind of help you when you think about building resilience or in the work that you're doing. It says, learning isn't a way of reaching one's potential, but rather a way of developing it. So remember, we're on this journey together. If there's anything that we can do to support you guys, to help you all out, if you want more resources, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Here's our contact information, and we're more than happy to help you guys with anything that we can.